And this is session 5 of the Spring Online Course Design Training Series. And this week we're going to be talking about putting your plan to the test. We're going to look at different assessment and measurement strategies and how you can revise your courses or build your courses around high quality assessment. So we're going to talk about a variety of different things. I've worked to put some resources together for you. So I hope you'll find something in today's session that you can use. So now that I've introduced it, I am going to turn my camera off because I do move back and forth with getting a bunch of different resources together, and I don't want you to see me moving all over the place. So with that said, I'll turn my camera off, leave audio on, and we'll go ahead and proceed. So with this, we have 5 topics we're going to talk about this week. The first one is ensuring the assessments measure the achievement of the stated learning objectives. We're going to continue that alignment discussion that we've had over the past couple sessions. As far as topic 2, when I talk about topic 2 right now, that's all we're going to touch on that, because your individual grading policies are your grading policies, and those should be set inside of your syllabus. But you want to make sure that you have that stated clearly so that students know if you have final exams where so much of a percentage of the final grade, other types of activities or assessments worth so much. Maybe you do a pre and a post, and the pre doesn't count, but the post assessment does. You want to line that out and spell that out in your course syllabus so that it's clear to students. We're not going to cover any more than that about that topic today. We're going to focus on topics 1, 3, 4, and 5. So topic 3, we're going to talk about providing specific and descriptive criteria for evaluating student work and relating that criteria to the grading policy. 4, we're going to develop assessments that are sequenced, varied, and suited to the level of the course. And then we're going to talk about tracking student progress just a little bit. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move into the presentation. As always, if you have any questions along the way, additional ideas or thoughts that would benefit the group, please feel free to jump in and share those at any time. You can do that through either the chat or if you want to turn your microphone on and address the group, you're more than welcome to do so. So to begin with, we're going to talk about why do we assess. And so the main purpose for assessing students should be centered around measuring learning outcomes. The learning outcomes should be focused on measuring not only what students know, but also what they can do and how well they can apply what they've learned. And so we're going to look at that and what that looks like throughout. But again, that goes to the alignment piece, which we'll talk more about in just a second. So where do we start with this process? Before we begin discussing the topic of assessment for this session, it's important that you should really have written measurable course and module, unit, level, whatever you want to refer to them as, objectives. Those objectives should be written at a level that is suitable to the course and should progress through Bloom's taxonomy. So with that, we're going to look specifically at Bloom's in a minute, but you want to start, you always want to make sure that that base level of knowledge is there. And so that's the very bottom, the levels 1 and 2 of Bloom's. And then you want to work through, as you work through each module or unit, however you call those or refer to them, and the course itself, you kind of want to progress upward so that by the end of the course, you have students really applying everything they've learned and they can show you in different situations. So with that being said, we're going to talk about the course design process, and understanding by design is what UBD stands for. And so it's often referred to as backwards design. We've talked about it in a couple of these sessions, but basically we start with the measurable learning objectives, and those tell us what we want students to achieve by the end of the module and by the end of the course. Then we look at, based on those, we start creating assessments, and we decide how we are going to determine if students have achieved those course and module level objectives. And once we have that all in place, then we go start putting together the learning materials and activities that we'll use to create the course. Now in session 4, we spent time, so we kind of did a jump. We went from measurable learning objectives in the second session, and then last time in the 4th session, we jumped over to materials and activities, and we're going back to assessments. But it should progress as you see. You start with the objectives, you move to the assessments, and then you go back and gather activities and materials that match up to the two. And so we're going to look at how that works in some specific examples as we progress through today's presentation. So when it comes to types of assessments, in the first section of today's session, we're going to discuss different types of assessment. We'll also discuss how to choose between the different types of assessment and how to effectively write assessment questions. So as we proceed, the first thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between formative and summative assessment. So most of us already know the difference, but I wanted to go ahead and restate the fact, and I wanted to tie it to the course design process that we should be focused on. So if you're not familiar with the difference between formative and summative, formative are more low stakes assessments that usually don't count towards the final grade and are designed to monitor student learning to provide ongoing feedback to the teacher and student. And then summative assessments are generally more high stakes. That is, they're used to evaluate students at the end of a unit or module or a course, require low stakes, risk-free formative assessments that allow students to learn and experiment. So I want to talk about the image that I chose for this slide for a reason, because I want to show the importance of not just the difference between formative and summative assessment, but the need to have both interwoven into your course design. So I put the guy that looks a little bit confused behind the wheel of a car on the picture for this slide. Imagine that you have a brand new want-to-be driver. They're ready to get out on the road. They want to learn how to drive and everything like that. Are you just going to stick them in the car, take them to the DMV and say, here, take your test, and that's it? Hopefully not. Hopefully prior to that, you may have them go to an open parking lot that doesn't have anything or any barriers around, and you may put them behind the wheel and you're with them. Maybe they've taken a driver's ed course. Hopefully they've been into reading and studying the book with the laws in terms of driving and everything. So you're preparing them in different ways before you take them to the DMV to take that official test where they're scored, and then the practical piece of it where they actually have to pass a driving test. Imagine if you didn't do those things, how prepared would that person be, whether it's young or old, to get behind that wheel and earn that test? And how would you feel if that person were on the road? And so now if you take that same example and apply it to your courses, if you just kind of throw some material out there and don't pay attention to how it is, and then all of a sudden you assess students on it, then you may get some that are you could luck out and find someone that really understands how to drive and does it real good right away, but the likelihood of that happening is very, very low. So you need to tie in different forms of assessment throughout to prepare students to get ready for that summative. And summative does not always have to be at the end. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So when we talk about online assessment types, we have the traditional, what I call quiz-based assessments. And those include questions that may be multiple choice, multiple answer, true, false, fill in the blank, numerical answer. And you can put short answer in there as well. Similar type question banks or questions that we're used to seeing on what we might call a quiz or a test. But there are other options that you have available in terms of other assessment types. Those include Moodle assignments. You can create an assignment and set it up and consider it in the assessment category. You can actually use discussion forums to count as assessments, essays, research papers, case studies, and of course there are far more items on this list, but those are just some of the high-level ones and some of the ones we'll talk about today. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about research papers as much because we all have a good understanding of those, but I do want to I am going to spend some time on case studies, possibly some options that you could use in terms of essays and discussion forums. We'll look at the same type concept for both of those. So to get started, I want to give a really good picture of this alignment and how it works and why the way this backward design is set up. So I titled this slide, So Many Options, How Do We Decide? Well, the answer to that question is simply based on, first, the words that we include in our objectives that are measurable. And so those can be a variety of different words that come from the different, and I used revised Bloom, so it's every of the words are different in terms of the different levels for 1 through 6 in the original version of Bloom's versus the revised Bloom's. They both have 6 levels. They both are very similar. But in the revised version, level 1 is remembering, 2 is understand, 3 is apply, 4 analyze, 5 evaluate, and 6 create. So when we start to look at our objectives, maybe we have some that start with define. Sorry, I didn't mean to go forward. Maybe we have some that start with define or compare or identify. If we have those that fit into that category, a lot of times those are with level 1 and level 2 for remembering and understanding of Bloom's. And we can address those with most standard quiz type items, whether they be multiple choice, multiple answer, the same type question options that I talked about a minute ago. Now, if you'll look inside that list, one of those options is summarize. Now, sometimes you can address summarize or summarizing with a question type, like a quiz type question. Other times you can't. So if I want to talk about an example, say I read an excerpt from, whether it's a poem or a story or something that I might read in an English course or even in a science course. And so I read through this and then it says summarize the main idea. Now, something like that, I could possibly work into a multiple choice question, and it would be more along the lines of recalling or remembering type thing, and then that would be considered lower level Bloom's. But if I have a student create their own summary and say, okay, here's you an article to read. Once you're done, summarize like the 4 main points of the article in like a single paragraph. If I did something like that, then I jump from like level 1 all the way up to a level 3, which is applying. And so in that situation, I've added some extra words, some words in the second row that talk like choose, determine, examine. And so with the applying level, some of those can still fit into your traditional quiz type questions, but not all of those action verbs are included in the applying level will work in a traditional quiz. So you need to look at some outside of the traditional quiz type assessments. Finally, we get into calculate, categorize, organize, distinguish, argue, assess, test, animate, adapt, compose, write, simulate, solve, mix, design, and build. When you start to get into those type words, those action words in your objectives, then you're going to have to do other things other than just ask students a multiple choice question, multiple answer, fill in the blank, matching, etc. Explain is one that should be in there, and I don't know that I got it written in there. But in terms of these sessions that we're doing this spring, we're tying them back in an informal way to the Quality Matters rubric. And so all of this alignment is a big piece of the Quality Matters rubric. And inside of that, like so I talk about a lot of the courses I review. And I had a course review where a lot of the objectives started with describe and explain. And yet when I went to review their assessments, they were all 10 to 15 to 20 question multiple choice items. And so there is not a good way to do an explanation of something in a multiple choice. And so those words, those actions drive your decision in terms of what types of assessment you'll use. Now, can you have multi-part assessments where the first part, say, is like a knowledge quiz, and then the second part is an application of some kind? Certainly. You can mix and match and do all kinds of things. But we want to progress through each, not necessarily a lesson, but through each main big topic, whether that be a unit or a module or an entire chapter, however you put those together. And then the course, you want to work your way from that level 1 remembering all the way up to levels 4, 5, and 6 are grouped together. It's not like you got to get from level 1 before you can get to level 2. There's kind of a gray area in between all of them. So let's look at what that would be like if we were teaching an actual course. So in order to look at this alignment example, I'm going to use the biology course from OpenStax, which is a OER textbook resource I showed in the last session. So give me just a minute while I bring up, I want to exit out of the presentation for a minute because I want to bring this up. Whoop, sorry, jumping ahead, escape out. We're going to minimize that for a second. And so let me bring up At this point in time, do we have any questions about anything while I get these 2 pages up to look at? All right, no questions? All right, one more page and I'll have them up here in just a second. And I apologize, they're going to be side by side because I want to do a comparison. I'll try to zoom in as much as I can, but I want to look at specifically a couple different things so we can see and visualize what I'm talking about with alignment. So let me get this off and I'll bring up the first page. Whoop. Okay, I mainly want to see the objectives in that. So that's what I want to focus in on that page. Let me get one more new window up real fast. I'll move this over here to the side. Okay, so in the biology course, and let me try to, yeah. So I have my learning objectives over on the left. Let me see if I can get rid of this update window. Okay. So on the left, I have objectives that state the following. In this lesson or in this chapter, I'm going to identify the shared characteristics of natural sciences, summarize the steps of the scientific method, compare inductive reasoning with deductive reasoning, and describe the goals of basic science and applied science. So with this particular textbook inside of the OER, inside of OpenStax, they have, if I go to the table of contents, they have for each lesson, some of them have what they call visual connection questions, but all of them have review questions and critical thinking questions. So we're going to start looking at the visual connection questions. And so when I bring those up, I can see that with question 1, it talks about a figure and it gives them a link that they could go back and look at the image. We don't necessarily need that to answer this. But it says, in the example below, the scientific method is used to solve an everyday problem. Match the specific method steps, numbered items, with the process of solving everyday problems, which are the lettered items. Based on the results of this experiment, is the hypothesis correct? If it is incorrect, propose some alternative hypotheses. So in the objectives, it simply says summarize the steps of the scientific method, okay? So I could simply, if I wanted to, in order to meet that objective, just simply say list out the 6 steps of the scientific process, and I would have my bases covered. But with this alignment piece, what it says, as long as you are at the same level of blooms or higher, then you can have what you would call like a misalignment. Like it can be at a higher level and still be good as long as it doesn't drop below. So if I go back to the basic levels of understanding and knowing, and then I think analyzing comes next, summarize falls right in there between understand and analyze. However, if I go and look at the question that they wrote to go along with that standard, I go above and beyond that, and now I'm applying the scientific method. So I have to, they give me the steps. So they're basically saying, we understand already that you should know these steps. Like that should be a given. We want to know that you know how to apply those in an authentic, like scientific-based scenario situation. So of course they're out of order, but if I look at this, basically what's happening, is that if you look at C, the observation, so 1 and C would match, my toaster doesn't toast my bread. So at that point in time, you ask yourself a question. You can say, if something is like, where's the question in here, why does my toaster not work? So with that question, 2 and F align. And so you work your way through the scientific process. So this, by being able to complete the question on the right, I definitely know that the student can summarize, but they can also apply the concept. So that's an example of alignment. If I look at the next question, it says, decide if each of the following is an example of inductive or deductive reasoning. And so they give 4 different examples, and students have to read those. And again, it does tell me to compare inductive reasoning with deductive reasoning, but the question is even better because not only is it saying, you know, it's giving specific scenarios that I might come across. So all flying birds and insects have wings. Birds and insects flap their wings as they move through the air. Therefore, wings enable flight. So I could, if I needed to, if I wanted to go back and reference, I could go back to the graphic that talks about deductive and inductive reasoning, and I could use that as a resource to answer the question. Because in this, so this goes back to the old concept of open book tests. If I write my questions in a certain way with the application expected, they can go back and look in the chapter and all they want, and the answer is not going to be word for them right there. They're going to have to apply those concepts in order to get the right answer. So in this type case, if I were doing something like this question in an open book scenario, they're still going to have to determine by reading the words of each statement whether it's an example of inductive or deductive. And I'm not going to get into answering those questions. But I did want to point that out in terms of what that alignment looks like between your objectives and your assessment. So with that being said, let's continue with the presentation till we get to the next example. So continue from current slide, we'll go to the next one. And so now we're going to talk about case studies for assessment. So I'll be open and say that I decided to use nursing as a key topic for this presentation, but there are case studies that you can use. Maybe you teach a marketing course, maybe you teach an economics course, maybe you teach a business course of some kind, psychology and the different levels of psychology that you have. There are different types of scenarios that you can present to students in the form of case study that have different types of information, and you can center all kinds of assessments around those. So I want to go into these examples. The first one that I have included is, I want to pull it up, is issues and trends in nursing. And so if I look over to the left, there are some different items that I have. And so I can go to reflective case studies, and I have some different options. Some of these are a lot better than others, but I want to look at the rural health care issues. And so when I go into that, this isn't the one I was thinking it was. Let me go back for just a minute, because some of these, like I said, are better than others. I think cultural issues is the one that I went to. Okay, so it gives a scenario. Now I would, if I were using this in my course, I would not link students directly to this scenario. I would make sure it does say in this particular one you can't do this, but in some, the open source ones that I want to show you, which the next one I'm going to show you is, you can pull this scenario in or write one similar to this in your own words, using your own situation, and then students have to go through. So it says, Tina is a 17-year-old Puerto Rican who has relocated to Houston, Texas, with both her parents. Her mother is very quiet and reserved and does not speak English or understand English very well. Spanish is her primary language. Her mother becomes ill, and Tina takes her to the local emergency room. Tina fills out her mother's paperwork due to the language barrier, and her mother appears to be ashamed for seeking help, but is experiencing excruciating abdominal pain on the right side. And so how can the healthcare providers begin to treat Tina's mother and meet? You could actually take that question, change the question, create a similar scenario, And these are what they call cases. These are reflective case studies. These are situations you might come across. Now, I'm not a nursing major. I'm not a nursing instructor. As I said, some of these are better than others. There's some that are under the ethics exercises. It goes into some good situations. There's one about a 70-year-old female with Alzheimer's, if that's the topic being studied. Maybe that's even in a psychology course, and you can look at some scenarios like that and get ideas from this to create your own scenarios and then create some questions that go along with them. You can have them fill out in a short answer form. You can have them respond to it in a discussion form. You can have them write more of an essay type response. Or in the next one we're going to look at, let me minimize this, example 2. Then you can go into, and I just realized there's one, I'll add a third example that I meant to put on here. What you can do is there's one of these I found that you walk through the different situations along the way, and I know where it is, I'll bring it up in a minute. But with the second one, there's different situations that they can go into, pediatric asthma, and if I go into that, it talks about, you know, why it matters, some important information, and then you can download the case. And with the case, you can see that there's actual x-rays provided. And if I open the Word document that goes along with this particular case, it gives me some medical information depending on the particular case you choose. So if I bring that up, it does talk about goals and objectives and everything like that. It does tell who it's for, like what level. This does say senior leaders, but again, you can change some of the different pieces. This does say at the bottom, this work is created under Creative Commons, so you could use it as long as you share alike. It does say that this information, but what I wanted to get to is the initial patient information. And so these are more or less the patient's vitals. And so maybe you decide not to use the specific scenario that was used, but you use a patient chart similar to this in your course if you're teaching a nursing course, and you have students interpret the results. The one that I was talking about a minute ago, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details about these because, as I said, I'm not a nurse or a nursing major, so I really don't know fully what I'm looking at. I just want to give examples. If I exit out of presentation view, I added this one in the notes section. And it's really cool because one of the other ideas that you can do, this is the American Academy of Pediatrics on immunizations and vaccines. So let me bring that up. And with this one, what's neat about it is if I go into these different case studies, you can see that there's 6-month-old, there's a 5-year-old, there's a 35-year-old, a 63-year-old. So let's go into the 63-year-old for right now. And I'm not going to get into the topic of vaccines by any means, but with this, these are interactive type activities that students can complete. But what I wanted to get at is so you can go through and you can see a profile of the individual. You can read about it. There's some audio. If I click play, I can listen to it. This one, it's not actually playing the audio for some reason. But if I go through, what I want to get to is the video clip portion.
Okay, everything's looking good. I would recommend you getting the zoster vaccine today. That's for shingles.
You know, I think I'll pass today. I don't think I'll take it this time because I don't think it's been on the market long enough. I don't know about the effectiveness of it. I think I'll just pass.
Okay. Well, it's been out for a number of years now, and they did do a lot of research on it before it was ever approved. They looked at not only.
All right, and I want to move on, but I can't, the way that they insert that video, I can't pause it. But what I wanted to get at is as your assessment, if you create this, if you go through this case-based learning type stuff, you can actually go in and say that that's your assessment is you have students like go through a scenario, go through a case, and then you have them actually create a video response as if they were sitting in the room with a patient, with a client, whatever it may be, and kind of create a dialogue back and forth. Maybe two students partner together, and one plays the patient and one plays the clinician, whatever it may be, whether they're the nurse, the psychologist, the social worker, or any type thing like that. So you can actually create the videos and make that part of your assessment. So that's a way of doing alternative assessments in that way. There's lots of different options. I could go on about the case-based learning a lot, but I want to keep on. There's another nursing option there that I'm not going to go into today, but it will be there linked as an example. So that's case-based learning, and you can use that in a variety of different ways. Now, another one is problem or project-based learning. And PowerPoint shut down on me, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Hold on just a minute.
Hey, Chris, this is Melissa. I wanted to point out that your live caption on your Google Chrome extension came through as you were playing that video.
Yeah, I noticed that. That was really, really nice.
Yeah.
So while Melissa's mentioning that, so Melissa sent out the week before last, Melissa sent out some information on the Google Chrome now having a live caption feature. And so it's just a feature you go in and install on your Chrome browser. It works in a number of different situations. You just saw there, I was playing a video. The minute that I hit play on that video, the captions popped up. I didn't have to turn them on or off. I could close them. It had an X that allowed me to do that. And so that's a good way of supporting your students. We've tested it with Melissa and I were having a conversation a minute ago. It was picking up everything I said, everything she said, pretty accurate, even when there's multiple voices and different types. So changing gears just a minute in the middle of the presentation while I get this back up. That is neat to see. It has worked really well. But I want to get back to this project-based assessment that I was going to show you. And so let me start this slide real quick, and hopefully it doesn't close out on me again, but we will go to this resource. I found one primary resource to use in terms of project-based learning. You can go out and find a bunch, but most of the resources, excuse me, are not examples of project-based learning in action. It's just about how project-based teaching and learning works. And so basically there are four main parts. You identify a problem, which we can find problems relate to any subject matter that we're teaching. Even if it's, a math course, we have a problem where we're trying to, build a house and need measurements or whatever that problem may be. So, we agree to, then we start working to try to figure out solutions to the problem. We design strategies or prototypes, and then we redefine the solution based on feedback from experts, instructors, and or peers. So this just gives a basic overview of the different segments of project-based learning, how you might be able to use it. There are some links at the bottom. Some of those were working, some of those were not. But that is another option you have for assessment, and one that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on today, just letting you know that it's out there. Next, I want to move on to scoring these. So now that we've started to come up with some ideas of some higher level assessment types, now we have to figure out, well, that's a really good idea, but how am I going to assess those? How am I going to make that measure equal from one student to the next, one project to the next, one submission to the next? And so the answer to that is to use high quality rubrics to assess those open-ended higher level assessments. So we're going to look at three different resources. If I go to the first one, it is from Iowa State University, and what's really neat about this resource is that it gives you some additional, on top of what I already talked about, ways that you can formatively or summatively assess your students throughout the course of a chapter, unit, module, whatever you want to call it. There's the 1-minute paper. If you're not sure with what each of these means, there's a quick description. During the last few minutes of a class period, ask students to use a half sheet of paper and write most important thing I learned today and what I understood least. You could do that in an online course. You know, how does that work? You could do it in a discussion forum. You could say, yeah, if you have synchronous sessions to your course where you have video conferencing at the end of a course, you could say, okay, by the next time we meet, I want you to have written your 1-minute paper. And then based on that, I want you to come up with at least 2 main topic sentences that you can share in our next virtual session. Maybe they come in, they share them through the chat. Maybe you break them into breakout rooms, something. There's different ways that you can use that. You can collect it and score it, and then it becomes more of a summative, or you can use it to guide further discussion and conversation, and then it becomes more of a formative assessment. Same thing with muddiest point, chain notes, application article. This is a cool idea. Take at least 15 minutes of class and ask students to write a short article about a major point that applies to the real world. Again, you could do that, same type things. And that would be an awesome discussion forum activity. Set it up so that they have to post before everyone else, before they can see anyone else's, and then they can go in and comment on, you know, compare and contrast who had what as the major point. Were there any points that were overlooked, misconstrued, that type thing. And then I'll talk more about the last one in a minute, but student-generated test questions. So one form of assessment would be, or could be, that you have students write some test questions of their own, and then they submit those. Maybe they submit them and they go through a peer review. You share them among peers, and then peers review them. And then after that, they're collected, and maybe some of those questions end up being the questions on the overall summative assessment. There's some other different ideas down throughout to gather information on students' attitudes and values, self-awareness, some different formative ideas. There's some good stuff on that Iowa State page. So I want to close that out. I want to close a couple of these out before I have too many windows open. And now we're going to go back and check out Resource 2. And Resource 2, if it loads for me. Here we go. Resource 2 is from the University of Rhode Island. And if you scroll down the page, and I'll zoom in a bit, or try to, because I know this print's small. Whoop, a little too far. But if you go down the page, there are some examples of different types of rubrics. So if you go down, there's a rubric for grading reflection assignments. And if you click on that, you can go in and see an example of that rubric. Now, some of these say page not found. So again, you have to go through and check to see, well, some of them were working more than earlier. I'm wondering if something's wrong with my internet connection. It so happens, look on this page from Rhode Island, here's Central Piedmont Community College that has their rubric attached. And I'm not sure what the rubric is. So if I do zoom in, it is for a research paper. So they have superior, sufficient, minimal, unacceptable. Now, one of the things I will show is that like it has a point range for each of these, and you'll see that they go from unacceptable to minimal, and there's a huge jump in point. And so you might want to really think about how you set up your point totals, but they're very detailed in the information that they provide in order for each item to be scored. And then it tells the breakdown. So each item is worth 25 points, or 25% of the total points out of 15. And it talks about how the score is broken down. So that's an example rubric. There's some more. If I get this closed out. There's some other examples on that page. There's an information literacy rubric. And it gives, this is kind of like if you're putting together some research type stuff. You can use that type of rubric, but there's some examples of different rubrics you might find in higher education critical thinking. There's a rubric bank at the University of Hawaii. And it's got some graduate level collaboration, teamwork, critical thinking, ethics, deliberation. So that can give you not only some ideas for additional types of alternative assessments, but also how to score them. If you're teaching a public communications course, you have oral communications, different rubrics you can use, reading, writing, assessment. There's different types of rubrics you can get to through that resource. We'll jump on over to resource 3. And this is through the University of Baltimore. It gives some, like, here's one on a PowerPoint presentation that I can go in and look at. So if I go to that PowerPoint presentation, some of these are Word documents, some of them are PDFs, others are websites. You just kind of have to go through what's there. I tried to get you a centralized resource so that you could use it to explore further. And so this is a 3 category where you have the option to score and check the items. Trying to get it all on one view here to where you can see it. And then it has like a scoring key that goes to exceeds, meets, fails. I don't like to use the word fails. I would probably say does not meet rather than fails to meet standards. Just the wording that you use sometimes when you're putting together a rubric or assessments, that can have an impact on students. So I would change that. And there's, you can customize it to meet your needs, but it is a base start that you have as a way to create rubrics to evaluate whatever you might be doing in your course. And you can see there's some on research skills, critical thinking, team member business concepts. There's a variety of different rubrics on that page as well. You can find other rubrics. I'll show you where I go to find most of these resources here as we get towards the end of the presentation, but there's more I want to cover. So I want to kind of pick up the pace just a little bit and change directions, because I spent most of that last little bit on alternative types of assessments. But one of the things I definitely want to make known is I'm not saying that you just need to scrap test quizzes in their normal traditional format that we're used to and move away from those, because those definitely have value and a place in every course. And a lot of that depends on how well the question stems are written and the way that those assessments are designed. So we're going to spend the next little bit, or the last part of our session today, focused on what I call quiz-based assessments. And so these are your matching, your multiple choice, and different things like that. So we'll discuss how to write quality question stems, how to import questions from the gift format, and creating question banks. So moving forward, let's talk about writing quality question stems. So when designing quiz-based assessments, there is a way to assess higher level blooms if the question stems are written properly. And in our resources, we're going to look at that. Of course, I mentioned this next point earlier, but I wanted to reemphasize one strategy would be to allow students to write peer review and submit questions. Now with that, you would want to give them the same challenge that I've sort of given you, and that's that you want to make sure that those questions progress in level of blooms. So it's not just like define or identify, which are the very bottom base level blooms questions, but that they go up to analyze and create and evaluate, investigate, those type things. So let's look at resource 1 that I've put together for you. And in this resource, it is from Vanderbilt University. It's a really good resource on writing good multiple choice test questions. And so if you scroll down, it talks about versatility, reliability, and validity. It talks about how to write the actual question and how to write what it refers to as distractors or alternatives or incorrect answers. It talks about how the stem should be meaningful by itself, an example of an irrelevant one, or that, you could go on and kind of, as I'm talking, I could ramble and say way too much, just like I could if I'm writing a question. And sometimes it becomes difficult for students to even determine what exactly is being asked. And then, of course, they struggle to answer it. So making sure you write the question itself in a way that it gets the main point across in a good way. You have the negative phrasing, like which of these does not, is not, does, that type thing. You can write negative phrased questions, but a better way to do that, instead of saying which of the following is not true about mitochondria, an option might be to say the water cycle, the water type extinguisher is suitable for putting out a fire caused by burning all of the following except. And so that is the same thing in a way of a negative phrase, but it's a different way of saying it. And so which one of these would be included? That means 3 of them would be within and 1 wouldn't, and that's the one we're trying to find. If I go on, the stem should be a question or partial sentence. And so if I take like an interior blank in the middle of the sentence, or so I say, in addition to the nucleus, blank are organelles that contain DNA. I could better word that by saying, in addition to the nucleus, which organelles contain DNA? Now, this might be one where it's one where multiple options are answers. And so I could set this up if I wrote it, and I don't know the answer to the question, but maybe it's A and C. So you could set up so it's a multiple answer question. They have to check all those that are true.
B.
I'm not going to go down. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was giving you the answer. It's B.
Oh, it's B. See, we learn something every day. Thankfully, we got our science people with us today. So then you work your way down through, and there's some really great pointers in terms of, how to write your questions in a way that, when it comes to math, it talks about, and I at one point in time was a math major. I changed away from it, but when you're in math, one of the things that I did that was the most valuable to me in my educational training was that I had a math course, and an educational, or prepare me to teach math, and we were given an assessment where students had gone through and worked out all the solutions to the problems and submitted it. And we had to determine which ones were correct and which ones were incorrect. And then we had to look at the steps they used and figure out where they went wrong in the steps. So we had to assess it in that way. But in doing that, when you're creating questions, you could create them so that if I went a wrong step and get a particular number, then I include that as a detractor. So I think I hear the chat. Let me check and see real quick if that is the case, because I want to make sure I'm answering any questions if we have those. Paul, you had something you wanted to say?
My question is, I don't give a lot of exams, but when I do, I usually use the test bank that comes with the textbook. Now, am I going to have to do a lot of rewriting and things like that? Because I figured these people have put this together. They know sort of what, I know what I'm looking for as far as the type of questions I want to use and what I've covered. But I guess, am I going to have to rewrite every question within the test bank?
Absolutely not. No, that's not the point. Starting out, like if I'm writing questions from scratch, these are some of the things that I would think about. The other time that I might bring this into focus is, say that I gave that assessment, Paul, that you're talking about, and it was from a question bank out of the textbook, and I start to look at my scores and results, and in the trends, I noticed that almost every student missed question 15, or almost every student missed question 20. I then am going to go back and look at that question and say, okay, now let me look at how it's written, and let me look at the answer choices. Is that the problem? Is it something that I didn't cover in the chapter, or what might it be? So that's more of where I might look at some of this stuff in terms of the rewriting. By no means, shape, or form. I'm actually going to show, I want to go back to that biology textbook I used as an example in a minute, and I'm going to actually pull in those questions and use those as a bank, similar to what you're talking about, how you do. So no, I'm not insinuating at all that you go through and reread every one of your questions. I just go forward with what you've been doing, but look for those trends and see if there's some that you might need to reword. Tony?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something in response to what Paul said. be careful with question banks provided by publishers in multiple different courses and different fields. The textbooks I've been given, the provided questions and answers aren't always right. So just be sure to do your due diligence and don't just take their word on it, because granted, they may be the experts, but they don't always proofread well.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I've run into that a couple times, but yes.
So that is one concern you have. The other concern that you'll have, and I'll cover more of this in a minute, is academic integrity, in terms of the chances are that those have been published in other locations with answer keys and everything. But I want to talk about ways to address that without a ton of work on your end in just a minute. But I want to get through, I want to show the other, but those were awesome questions and a great discussion there. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about redoing everything from scratch. You're already doing a lot of really good stuff. I'm just giving you some pointers on things to look at or think about, maybe as you're redesigning, maybe you get a new course, maybe you change textbooks, you're revising different things. These are just some things you can think about or look at. So resource number 2, yeah, it definitely doesn't have a virus. I had it up earlier, so I'm not sure. I'll go back and look and see what's happening there. That's not good. Addressing academic integrity. So that is the actual next point in our presentation.
It should be,
so,
if you email me the link, and I'll see how it looks as an opposite user and see if
I turned it all off, and I went to just YouTube to pull it up, and there's no subtitles.
Shoot me an email and I'll take a look.
All right, sorry. Okay, so addressing academic integrity. So when creating quiz-based assessments, there are a couple of different strategies that can be used to address academic integrity issues. They include creating question banks, shuffling questions, and answer choices. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and I talked about this in the fall, but it's been a while since I talked about it, so I want to kind of bring it up and show part of the point that I was making a minute ago. Let me get this up here. If you're not familiar, there's a site out there called Course Hero. If I go to Course Hero, there's other sites that are similar to it. It's meant to be a study site, but it's kind of fallen off the wagon and become all kinds of different things. You can go in and search for Mitchell Community College, and it's going to come back with over 4 million results. And you can see a variety of different things. Some of these may be just handouts or notes, where some of them may be example essays that were submitted. Here's chapter 14 questions. It may be responses, it may be quizzes. You may find that you have, if you're not doing some of the things I'm about to show you, you might find where someone's taken a copy of your exam. Here's some math, I believe. And I'm not signed in, so it's not going to show it to me, but it is a math quiz where someone has gone through and posted the entire thing with the solutions online, so you'll be able to, so students are doing that. That was designed as a site to help with homework, but it's kind of, as I said, falling off the wagon. So some of the things that you can do to combat this when you're doing traditional quiz-based, if you use the alternative assessments that I was talking about, the likelihood that that's going to happen, especially like if you're using things like case studies, the likelihood that 2 students are going to have the exact same response to something like a case-based scenario is very slim. But if you're using like multiple choice, matching true, false, and all that type stuff, and you're not doing anything specific to change the scenario, then you might have students who are, sharing answers, different things. So 2 main things we can do to combat that. That is to create question banks. And then, of course, with that is to shuffle the questions and the answer choices. Now, notice that I didn't put 2 popular ideas on here, and that is to limit the number of attempts on the quiz, and that is also to add a time constraint to the quiz. And that is because those things can lead to issues in terms of causing stress to students, creating additional problems and everything like that. I can really get to what I need if I simply um, create question banks and shuffle the order of different things. So we're going to talk about what that looks like, and I'm going to do that as an example as I start to wrap up. So as I put things together, we're going to jump over into Moodle for a second. We're going to go back to that biology course, and I want to show you how you can easily, and I did this in the fall, I have a resource put together for you, but how you can go in and use what's called the gift format in Moodle and create quiz questions very quickly and efficiently without having to build them manually inside of the Moodle software. So I'm going to get out of the presentation for a minute. Well, that's the end of that part of the presentation. I want to minimize both the presentation and everything else, and I'm going to bring up a new window with the faculty staff repository. So if you go in Moodle, everyone has access to the MCC faculty and staff resource repository. If you go down the left side to the area where it says instructional design, I think it went past it. So it's gray. I'm overlooking the one that's a different color. So instructional design, on that page, if you scroll, you have some a PowerPoint presentation. We already did one on assignments and stuff like that, but when you get to the bottom, all the choices we have creating with Moodle quizzes. I did a whole presentation in the fall on working with both the Aiken format and the gift format. And what those do are they allow you to bring in questions very quickly using from a Word document, or I'm going to show you from Notepad, but it works the same way. It just saves you a step that you can create them real quick, even with your correct, incorrect responses, and build an assessment pretty quickly. So I've got tutorial videos in there. With the Aiken format is limited to just multiple choice questions. But if you use the gift format, we've figured out that you can create fill in the blank, matching, multiple choice, true, false, essay. You can put them all on one document together and import them pretty quickly. So let's look at what that looks like. So if I go into, I've got a whole folder on my desktop titled Word Doc to Moodle Quizzes. And so I'm going to show a variety of those for a minute, and then I want to show that in action, possibly. That's not wanting to, hold on. Here we go. So inside of this, I have created a variety of different templates, and one of the last ones I created is called Short Answer and True False Template. And so if I go into that and open that as a Word document itself, I can see that with the way the gift format works, I don't have to really be fancy with my Word document. All I have to do is type my statement, and then in squiggly brackets at the end, I type either a capital T or a capital F. And by doing that, like if I create one, I can go down through, and then after that, I can copy one and repaste it, Control C, and go down, Control V. And I can quickly create a series of true-false questions that quickly, and I can import this file into, by following the process, I just save it as a plain text file, import it into Moodle, and Moodle then transforms the top questions into true-false, the bottom ones that have the squiggly with the equals in a word or a phrase into fill-in-the-blank questions. Notice the one that I have where I have a blank, I have two equals. That means that it will accept cyber stalking as a word, one word together, or cyber stalking with a space. And so you can do that. Those are two different options you have. But what I'm going to talk about is kind of like the concept of what Paul did. So I've created, I do this in WordPad. So if I'm on my desktop that you're seeing now, if I just go to, if I go to search, and type in Notepad and bring it up. When I create it inside a Notepad, I don't have to go through the process in Word of saving it as a plain text file. I can do it either way. It's not a big deal. When I open that, hold on just a minute. Then I get a plain document, but I already have one up that's already got my formatting that I need. And so when I bring this additional Notepad up into the right window, come on, you can see that it has the format for a multiple choice question, and I have what the answer would be, and then I have correct and congratulations. So I can build in real quickly my correct, incorrect feedback. So real fast, I'm just going to walk through that process with one item real fast from the biology course. So let me get my OpenStax back up and get my assessment questions. Sorry for the delay. While I'm doing this, does anyone have any thoughts, ideas, additional questions, or concerns along the way? Okay, so I've copied my questions from my source, and I can right-click and paste those in there. And so once I do, then I just have to go through and figure out, I just go through and add the formatting. So I can copy and paste. So rather than this being, what I'll do in front of here is I'll grab my little format, and I'll change out my numbers. Okay, and then inside there I'll put the equal. So basically I want to format it to look exactly like that, and I can make those adjustments real quick. I can make this question 1, I can make this question 2, I can make this question 3, and so forth. I'm just going to format two of these real quick rather than all of them. So let me delete the rest out so I can just show you what it will look like when I import it. So I'll make this question 1 at the top, and I'll make this question 2. Okay, and so I want to go in front and I'll put, this is my, and I don't know that this is the correct answer, but that's what we're going to make it for right now. We'll put my equals. I'm not going to do correct, incorrect feedback. All the others have the squiggly sign, and I forget the actual name of that. Please forgive my terminology. Okay, so I have that formatting done real easily. I'm going to save this file just so I know what it is. And I'm just going to call it test quiz. I want to save it to my download because I don't want to keep it. So I'll go ahead and hit save. And now I'm going to go over into Moodle. So I want to go to my course. So my courses. Hold on just a minute. I think we have a question. Oh, Deshaun's helping me out again today. Oh, no, that's from earlier. Or maybe not. Okay. Anyways, yes. So Deshaun's helping me with my science skills today. So if I go into, say I'm going to use open course design or online course design, I'm going to use that as my example. And I want to create a new quiz. So if I go to create learning activity and create quiz, so I can go to test quiz. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and just do save and return to course. And when I go back to my test quiz and I open it, it's going to tell me that I don't have any questions. So I can go ahead and edit the quiz. And where it tells me in terms of questions, I can go to add from question bank and stuff like that. So To get to a question bank, if I'm building a quiz by itself as standalone, I can add a new question and do that. But what I want to do is I'm going to go up to edit quiz. I'm going to go down to question bank, and I want to go to questions. And so what I've done, you can see that I've done this before in different ways, but I like to bring all of my questions into banks because I can use them in different ways. In this situation, we're just going to bring that one document in so you see how it works. So I'm going to go to categories, and I'm going to create a new category, and I want to call this, so I already have test quiz, so I'll do something else. In this category, I want to call Chris quiz. Okay. And then real fast, I'm going to add the category, and we are wrapping up. This is one of the last few things I want to show. So we are going to finish in the next few minutes. So now that I have Chris's quiz, I can go to that quiz. I can go to import. And when I go to import, I want to choose the gift format. I do want to make sure that I change this error. No, I leave that the same. I change stop on error to no. And I choose the file. I go to where it was located. I can drag and drop it there. I can browse for it. I'm just going to browse for it and do downloads. And there's test quiz. And so I tell it to upload this file. Depending on how long it is, it may take a little longer. So I hit import. And it tells me that I have 2 questions. And it shows me examples of those questions. Now, I did it real quickly and didn't do the right formatting. So you can see it messed it up just a little bit. So I would need to fix it. But the first question that was formatted correctly, which was question 1, if I go into preview, then it's all set up. My question's there, my answer choices are there. If I select one and choose to, I'm in preview mode. But if I were to select it and answer it, and it was correct or incorrect, the first one would have feedback. So I can real quickly do that, and I can go back in. Once they're in once, I can create a duplicate of it, and then I can move that. Say that I wanted to, use this particular question in a formative assessment in the middle of the module, but I also wanted it to be one that was either on the chapter test or the final exam. I can make a copy of it. In that case, what I might say is this copy I want to be the chapter exam for question 1, and then take the copy off. And then once that's finished, when I go down and save changes, then I can move that to wherever I need to move it to. So I can select it and I can choose to move it out. Sorry, that's down at the bottom, move to, and I can say I want that one to go to the default for online. I don't want it to go to the other one because it'll mess that other quiz up, but I can move it back and forth. So that's the last thing that I want to share. I do recommend that you go to, again, if you want to see how to get to, if I go back to my courses, you have the MCC faculty staff resources inside of there. And I know I've worked with a couple instructors on this process of the gift format, and they figured out you can do even more question types than I have. But to figure out how that's done, you can go to the bottom of the page, look at that whole entire section on all the choices we have working with Moodle quizzes, and you have documents. You have an example template where you just open it, and it's all ready for you to start putting in questions, and different options that you have for quickly creating quiz-based assessments in Moodle. Even if it's pulling from a digital version of a question bank that comes with your textbook that you have permission to use, then you can do that fairly quickly. And some of them may already provide a gift format file for you to use. You would just have to check your particular company that you use, textbook, resource, and so forth to see if that exists or not. With that being said, I went through a lot really quickly. I know I did. It took me a long time to put this session together, and there's far more that I could have covered than what I did, but I want to respect everyone's time. I do want to go in, whoops, I'm taking you to my CIS 110 course. That's not where you want to go. Let me back out of this for a minute. And with that, I want to take you to my courses and show you the week 5. Oh, one thing. Last time I messed up and somehow didn't get the session 4 discussion forum added. That has since been added, so it's ready to go. If I go into this week's session, session 5, I've added the page for that, the session details and information, our topics that we covered. The readings, I wanted to specifically mention these because it's in the online teaching at its best. So the very bottom one where it talks about developing valid assessments, there's some really good stuff that goes along with what I talked about on pages 49 through 61. How to create quiz questions, multiple answer, true, false. There's a section on reducing cheating, information on papers, graphics, and projects, self-assessment, reflection, group work, all kinds of good stuff in that resource. There's also a good section, I like the title of it, in the Conquering the Content. It's titled Lesson Assessment, or How Do I Earn Points on What I Have Learned is the title of it. And it's got some information on authentic assessments, quizzes, points earned, different things, how to determine all that, how to set it up. And then there's the online teaching survival guide that has some good information as well. So I didn't get the page to that. I need to fix that. There's a specific section that I'll add to that I'll get on there. There is a discussion forum for this week, and all that is take some of this stuff that we talked about today for a test drive, see what you think. Are there any ways that you'll change what you're doing, things that you're already doing, you know, different things like that. Very simple, very basic, and that's all that I have for this session. So I do appreciate you all taking your time to be here today. I hope that I shared some new information that you hadn't thought of. I do appreciate the audio comments in the middle and the interaction, and hope we have more of that. But any other questions, thoughts, ideas as we close today's session out? All right, well, thank you all, and we are done. I'll go ahead and stop the recording, but I'll be here for just a minute and hang around in case you have any questions that you want answered.